You're in for a very captivating evening. Amanda Sliles, chair of the Habersham History Talks group, a very dynamic team of over 25 bright and serious men and women, residents of Habersham, who all have a love of history. So first, a big thanks to the Parish Church of Habersham and Pastor James Sosnowski for warmly welcoming us to the Habersham, beautiful church in Habersham, and to enjoy this beautiful and exciting History Talks event. So thank you, Jamie. Also, a big thank you to all the members of the Habersham History Talks group. They are just great. They make this event happen. And so will they please stand and will you give them a round of applause for being here and being part of us. And a little bit about Habersham History Talks, which was created, believe it or not, 3 years ago. Our team identifies and recruits very interesting, dynamic speakers on all types of historical topics. We've had everyone from someone about the shrimping industry, Captain Woody Collins, to the history of Port Royal, to Dr. Larry Rowland. It's just been phenomenal. So we have 3 speaking engagements a year. If you are interested, please see one of us with one of our landlords or sign up in the back. One other thing, housekeeping comments, make sure your phone is off, your cell phone is off. The event will be recorded, so anyone who was unable to attend can see and hear the event on the Habersham website. And our event will promptly end at 8:30 unless it's a thunderstorm, and we may have to end it just a little bit earlier. So now one of our Habersham History Talks members, Rob Hendricks, is here to introduce our speaker for the evening. Thank you, Rob.
Okay, my voice go over. I'm going to introduce you to 2 things. Our speaker, Mary Taylor, Molly Taylor, and Maritime History. I noticed over the years, since I've been interested, commonly Maritime History is sort of forgotten. It's washed over with Army history, art history, music history, architectural history. You don't really hear much about maritime history of our country or the world. I read on the web that by the 1980s, maritime history scholarship was almost extinct in this country. And yet, much of the wealth of this country is based on maritime trade, the past and the present. St. Helena was established because the Sound was here, but also the trade winds brought all the gold ships to Spain and drifted over, went to Europe. It was a maritime reason to be here. Most of America's great cities, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, are maritime cities. They're not there for a magic reason. Beaufort looks a great deal like it does because of the Battle of Port Royal. In other words, the Federal Navy got in here, took the place over immediately, and therefore there wasn't really a civil war in Beaufort, and we have all these houses. Our language itself reflects a great deal of maritime history. We all use the word scuttlebutt, right? A loose cannon, right? You got Shanghai, a son of a gun. You know what son of a gun means? They didn't let the maritime guys off the ships, so they let the women on. And if you were conceived next to the gun, you were a son of a gun. Or the cat's out of the bag. Well, our generation uses that. I don't think the new generation uses that. That refers to the Catholic cats. Then little tidbits of history will come out with Molly, but the first steamship to go across the Atlantic in America was the SS Savannah. We should know that kind of thing, but most people don't. In terms of naval history and battles, have anyone heard of the Battle of the Capes? The Battle of the Capes was the English engagement just before Yorktown. If the English fleet had gotten into Jamestown, we wouldn't be Americans. But the French stopped them. We talk about Yorktown, we don't talk about the Battle of the Caves. Here's a fun fact. How many saw the movie Master and Commander? Well, Master and Commander, the featured ship on there is called the Surprise, which is a fictional name. But the original name for that reproduction was the HMS Rose. The HMS Rose was a British ship that was considered the ship that Captain Cook would use. He chose not to use it, he wanted something more practical, so he wound up with the HMS Endeavour. So the Rose came here and was basically a patrol ship along the North American coast. And by the end of the war, it was getting old and they decided to scuttle it. They scuttled it right in the Savannah River out here to stop any American shipping from coming in. And the bones are still there. So, it's not surprising that, I don't know, I personally think that kind of stuff is interesting. And Molly and her institution exists partially to save us from all this ignorance and this to be more aware of what why we're here. So, getting on to Molly. Molly Taylor is originally from Kansas City. And her father's here. He took her there, I guess. But she went east and she got a master's degree in arts administration from Columbia. And before that, a bachelor's degree in art history from Connecticut College. So she's well versed in organizing and running things. She went to New York City and worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the World Trade Center on Arts and Cultural Development. Here again, sort of coalescing to something that be useful to us down here. So she moved to Savannah in 2008, worked at the Telfair Museum's Director of Development, and then became Director of Museum Management and Strategy later, before starting her own business. But she made the leap, and now she's the Executive Director, whose names and titles are getting more impressive, at the Ships of the Sea Museum. On the outside, in her normal private life, she's active in her church. She's a member of the Savannah Rotary. She's a member of the Propeller Club, which is an organization of ship museum people and scholars and whatever trying to promote maritime history. And she has two teenage sons and a husband. Two of the sons here and a father is here. So with that, I'll pass this on to Molly.
Leading edge of the rest of you. So I'm going to give you some maritime history, some historic preservation, details on the Scarborough House that the museum is housed in on the west side of downtown Savannah. We have the largest private gardens in the historic district. There are three main elements to our mission: gardens, this historic house, and maritime collection. All three are equal. So hopefully when you visit, you look around and you say, wow, they seem to do all three of these things very well. But I'm going to give you a bit more about my maritime past. I went to a summer camp called Culver Military Academy, Culver Summer Camps in Culver, Indiana, the very northern part near South Bend. That camp, when I was there in 1991, 2, and 3, they had and still have a three-masted schooner. My son Finn was on the three-masted schooner team last year, and you have to take a test and compete to get in the running. So you can see me, I don't have a pointer, but you can see me on the right-hand side. I'm on the mizzen royal. The mizzen mast is the back mast. The royal sail is the top sail of the three that are back there. When I was on the ship, in 1993 when I was a first classman, my third year that I was there. Bill Koch, one of the famous Koch brothers, was there. He had given what is called mini maxis to the school. They're miniature America's Cup style boats. Back then, they all were one design boats. Everyone sailed the same thing. You had to do it within a certain style, and you couldn't deviate very much. So I had this marvelous opportunity. I sailed catamarans, I sailed windsurfers, these mini maxis, lightnings. They didn't have opties. They had everything. Sunfish. They had soup to nuts of every sailing boat that you could. And my dad taught us to sail in northern Michigan, in Harbor Springs. So that was sort of where it all came from. This is me. I'm on the far left here in the blue culottes. The girls nowadays look much more like the boys. That was a moment when the girls finally got these NCO belts. They're called non-commissioned officer belts. You can see the lake back there and all the sailing masts sticking up into the trees. So I was the regimental adjutant, which arguably is the second highest rank. It was the first time a girl at the camp had gotten the rank. And so my job was to yell the orders to the entire camp of like 1,500 kids. You can see there's some guys on the far right-hand side who are in the cavalry. The Clover Black Horse Troop marches in all the presidential inaugurations. They did not because of the storm this year. The naval kids are next to that. The girls are on the far right-hand side, and there's some aviation kids in the middle. Anyway, it was a great experience. And after Culver, I went to Connecticut College. This is a picture that is not me, but this is what kids look like these days with someone taking a great cell phone shot. We sailed 420s. We sailed up and down the East Coast. I sailed at Naval Academy. I sailed all the time in Boston in the Charles River. We looked a little more like that. That's me on the far left-hand side in my red life jacket. And someone was taking this picture from the dock with a really old camera, a point and shoot. But I loved the experience, and competitive sailing at Connecticut College was a great finale to what I had sort of done every summer up to then. And summer after senior year in high school, I taught sailing. Summer after freshman year in college, I taught sailing on Cape Cod in Harwichport, the Stonewall Yacht Club. Met all kinds of fun kids and sailed in the 420 North Americans. We got fifth place. It was an amazing experience. So I left my sailing behind, generally speaking, and I spent 25 years in art museum business and doing consulting for the last COVID 2020 through 23, my own consulting business, and we had all different kinds of nonprofits that I worked with. Ships of the Sea was one of my clients, and I sat down with their board one January day, and they said, well, we need a new executive director. And I said, well, I'm really in the art museum business. And they said, yeah, but you just told us you're a sailor and you understand this. So I went home and I thought about it. And part of my hurdle was that Ships of the Sea at the time was a very sleepy place. I'll get into more of the history later on, but basically it was founded by Mills Lane Jr. in 1996. His son moved in 1996, and they have a great endowment, but only lived within what they had. So if they wanted to do new and interesting programming, they didn't have the money for it, so they didn't do it. If you happened in there, great. You might have enjoyed it. The museum has not changed in approximately 30 years. It has wonderful displays that are very professionally done, but it's very hard to move things around. So that was my challenge, and I decided that I like problem solving and that I would try and take on this Sleeping Museum and see if I could shake Sleeping Beauty awake and help her do something else. So Maritime History in Savannah really starts with James Oglethorpe. And as you maybe well know, I know we're only an hour south, but you probably digest more South Carolina history than you do Savannah history. But Oglethorpe came over in the Anne, and here is the ballroom of the Scarborough House featuring the Anne. I'm going to jump around and go back and forth. I'm going to focus on ships. I'm going to tell the story of the building. I'm going to go back to ships. So just stay with me. So the Anne here is I have some of my details here in so not that long. Every ship model on the first floor of our museum is built to 3/8 of an inch equals 1 foot in scale. So when you're walking around, you can look at the Anne and you say to yourself, okay, that's not very big. It's 87 feet long. It was a 200-ton British galley ship. They started just east of London in Gravesend, England, out the mouth of the Thames River, around the bottom of England, and it took them 2 months, 114 colonists, 2 months to get to Savannah. They first stopped in Beaufort, and at the time, interestingly, I'm sure you probably have heard about the Georgia Ports Authority. It's the 4th largest port in the United States now by quantity of things coming into the port and by physical footprint. They're a huge entity. They are wanting to dredge the Savannah River again. It right now is at about 37 feet or 57 feet, I'm trying to remember. And they needed to be deeper to match what the Panama Canal is. The goal is that you have these what are called post-Panamax ships, container ships that come through the Panama Canal. The goal is that you can get them up the Savannah River. The Savannah River is 20 miles long, which is very long, but it gets you longitudinally equidistant with Cleveland. So if you can ship something from India and you can get basically to Cleveland, your access to the middle of America is really great. So that's the bonus of coming to Savannah. Well, Oglethorpe could not get his ship up the Savannah River. It was not deep enough. So even then, they were dredging. They eventually started using I-beams to dredge the Savannah River. Oglethorpe didn't bother, obviously. He couldn't, and so he parked in Beaufort, and they took little ships up the Savannah River, the 20 miles, to this beautiful Pine Bluff that is now the downtown historic district of Savannah. Here's a detail of the top of the ship model. All of our models are very precisely made. The rigging, the structure, the masses, the size, they're all based on drawings and stories, written history of these ships and their feats. 114 colonists. The rumor is one died, one was born. I think based on some research I've done recently, it's 2 people died, but regardless, they had a pretty successful trip. And, you know, when I think about Savannah and its colonization, I think that they're walking into a wilderness, nobody was there, and voila, Oglethorpe sets up his square plans, his master plan for Savannah, and in fact, there were people there. There were native people there. Mary Musgrove, have you heard of Mary Musgrove? Anybody? Some? Mary Musgrove, I like to think, was arguably the first woman-owned business, minority-owned business in the state of Georgia. She ran a trading post just right where the Georgia Ports Authority sits right now. So if you're coming from South Carolina over the bridge, look right, that's where her trading post was. She and her husband ran it. She was the lead interpreter for James Oglethorpe, and she was an essential part of the politics of the colony of Georgia when it was founded. Maybe you know that Georgia it was founded with debtors who were trying to make a new life for themselves, and it was created as a buffer to Florida for South Carolina, because Florida was inhabited by Spaniards. They would often come across the border and try and steal and fight the South Carolinians. So Georgia had this very specific purpose. Oglethorpe arrives in Savannah on February 12th, 1733. We are coming up on the 300th anniversary of the colony of Georgia, which we're all really looking forward to. Bizarrely, we lived in New York City for 10 years, and we had a baby, this young man on the right, and he was born on February 12th, on Georgia Day. And so it really is a very fun sort of newcomer's luck that we ended up with this child who has the same birthday as the state of Georgia. So we celebrate really heartily. So Oglethorpe sets up the plan. You can see, I know all of you have probably been to Savannah, you know where MLK is, but MLK was West Broad Street. You had West Broad Street, you had East Broad Street. And Broadman Street is right here, and Ships of the Sea is about right there. It's at where Congress Street comes across West Broad Street was one of the most important streets because all of the warehouses were south and east of West Broad Street. South on West Broad Street and on the east side. It was the only paved road in town. So it was paved with wood. Every other street in Savannah was dirt, sand. I'm sure it was a miserable place when it rained. But living on West Broad Street was really the ideal thing because you had this lovely paved street for yourself. So this is a rendition, a print from our collection that's not on view, but it beautifully illustrates all the sailing ships that have come into harbor, parked, are moving goods you can see in the horse and carriage up West Broad Street. Interestingly, the tugboat, when it became very less rare, that really changed maritime history and it changed maritime functionings and allowed sailing ships to pull into port quicker, easier, the goods to get off the ship better. And so there are these various changes that have happened along the way that have really modernized and improved shipping. And it's happening today too, with these Panamax ships at the deepening of the river. It's a regular thing. This is just one little tidbit that I love. This is a shot of River Street in Savannah, right next to the water. This ballast stone, all of the stones on River Street were thrown off of a ship because they didn't need all of it. They were loading more goods on and the ship was too heavy, so you had to balance your ship with ballast stones. They had, a plethora of them sitting around, and if you needed them, you grabbed one and you put it on, or you grabbed one and you took it off. Well, this is a 17th century Chinese funeral marker that somehow came from China, was loaded on a vessel as ballast, and someone chucked it off of a ship in Savannah, and it ended up in the streetscape. Well, someone tried to steal it, and the city of Savannah said, I don't know how they knew who it was, but it is in the city archives. You can call them up and see it, because it's in a nice little display. But to me, that illustrates how global Savannah has been for so many years. Okay, so Ships of the Sea, as you can see with our logo on the left, is a beautiful mansion. The house was built in 1819 by William Scarborough and his wife Julia. They had 10 kids total. Some did not make it to adulthood. William is most known for the steamship Savannah. He was 44 when he built the house. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit just so you can see it. Look at the house while we're talking about this part. Originally, the house did not have a third story. We don't have pictures of it back then because they didn't take any. But the house was built in 1819 by William J. He was arguably a celebrated architect in Savannah. He was not well known after he left Savannah or before he came. So there are 3 houses that remain. 2 are owned by the Telfair Museums, the Owens Thomas House and the Telfair Academy. And when William Scarborough saw these 2 houses going up in 1818, 1819, he said to himself, I need that too. And so he hired William J. to design his house. And this is what it looked like. This is, I think, 1850s rendition. He was 44 years old. At the height of his wealth, he was a shipping merchant. He was the consul general to Sweden and Russia. So I think those are ambassador roles back in the day. He served on the vestry at Christ Church, which is the mother church of the state of Georgia. It was an Episcopalian church that was founded when Oglethorpe landed, and it still is a wonderful church that we happen to go to. You can still visit it today, it's quite lovely. So Scarborough builds the steamship Savannah, and it is, if you know how to sail, one of the key pieces is that you need to have wind to sail a boat. And Scarborough said to himself, well, boat that has paddle wheels on the side of it, so that if the wind stops blowing, I can turn on my paddle wheels and keep going, which really was very novel. The paddle wheel had been invented in 1813, and paddle wheelers, existed in 1819, but they would have hugged the coast. They could not go into open water because they couldn't steer. The waves might rip the paddle wheels off, and then they were really in trouble. So it was novel that in 1819 he took the sailing ship Savannah, put a coal-fired steam engine inside of it that powered these paddle wheels that you can see here. Additionally, this rendition does not necessarily show that one as well. They show sort of a different look to it. They were attached, each paddle wheel element was attached by a chain so that he could unhook it and fold the paddle wheels up so that if you were sailing, your paddle wheel was not going to get ripped off by the waves. So he had thought about this very carefully. The interesting piece about the steamship Savannah is that it was not very big. It was 87 feet long. So it's smaller than, 95 feet long. It's 98 feet long, slightly larger than the Anne that the colonists came over on. So 1819, Scarborough builds his house. May 1819, President Monroe comes to visit. He has just won the presidency, and he's on a campaign tour of America to solidify his role as president. He comes to the Scarborough House. It is the fanciest, newest house in town, and so he stays with the Scarboroughs. He's written down in the paper to have sat in one of the two front windows as though he was on TV. I mean, back then, you want to see something famous, you don't have a TV, you're going to look in the window. There is President Monroe. He christened the ship on May 22nd, and it left Savannah's port. Fast forward to 1933, United States Congress declares Maritime Day, National Maritime Day, May 22nd, based on the success of the steamship Savannah. So just, a week ago, today in fact, we celebrated National Maritime Day. The Propeller Club really blows it out because they want to celebrate maritime industry. I've been at Ships of the Sea for 2 years, and our goal is to make it known that we are the house where the steamship Savannah was born, and so we really have a vested interest in celebrating National Maritime Day. We're trying to do that. So steamship Savannah leaves the port. It gets to Liverpool, England in 1 month. So he shortened Oglethorpe's trip by a month, which is pretty decent. They did not have to run the steam engine that much. Obviously, if the wind keeps blowing, you don't need to use it. He did steam into Liverpool to show off. Interestingly, you can see the puff of black smoke coming out of the chimney in the middle of the ship. The people of Liverpool did not think that was funny. They said, "Oh my God, you are on fire. Do not come into our port. We don't need you to burn the whole place down." So he says, no, obviously I'm a steamship, and they had not seen that before. They continue around to Arendelle, Norway, Helsinki, Sweden, Copenhagen, and they end up in St. Petersburg, Russia. That was sort of the finale. The goal had been to sell this ship. Oglethorpe had invested $60,000 in 1819. When the ship gets back, there is a crisis in Savannah, there's a recession in America, yellow fever is ravaging the lands, and so he sells his ship for $6,000. He takes a huge loss. He was the president of the company and the lead investor, so he's declared bankrupt. As an insolvent debtor, you are not allowed to own property. So his goods were all sold on the front steps of City Hall, and luckily he had a wealthy brother-in-law, Robert Isaacs, and Robert bought his brother's debt and allowed the family to stay in the house. So they were there about 30 years. Another woman named Margaret O'Byrne bought the house. Her husband immediately died. Civil War started. Her 2 sons were in the party that went to surrender to Sherman. So she really walked away from this house saying, "I don't want any more of this." She left Savannah. She sold the house to the Catholic diocese. The next phase of our story, I'm going to give you just a brief overview of the 90 years that the house served as a school for black children. It really was incredibly novel. Someone said to me recently, oh, this was the first example of DEI. So it's pretty funny. So the Catholic Diocese owned it. A man named Robert Duran bought the building and gave it to the Board of Education with the caveat that it must be used to educate black children. Civil War had just ended. It was 1872. It was time to help out our other, countrymen and educate these black kids. Most of them, if you guys have kept up on Savannah history, lived in Yamacraw. Still called Yamacraw, was called Yamacraw then. It's the low-income housing that is immediately behind the museum. And I've met people who grew up in Yamacraw and went to the West Broad Street School, and they said to me, this was a stepping stone to success. My dad got public housing, and then we sort of got our feet under ourselves, and then we bought a house in the South Side, and everything was right. It helped many families reach the American dream that everyone should have access to. So this is the building as it was during that time. You can see the trees have gotten a little bit bigger in front of the building, which I do love seeing, and you'll see later they're even bigger still. So it was West Broad Street School, 1872 to 1962. Here are the kids on the front, looking sweet. Here they are in class. So remember, there were 3 stories back then. The house is not big, and I should know how many square feet it is, but it is not big enough to house 800 kids, which is how many were in there at the height of their use of it. And they taught 1st grade through 8th grade. This woman, Mrs. Ellis, who I spoke to, she said not everyone went to school 5 days a week. So it could be that you went on the Monday, Wednesday schedule, and someone else went Tuesday, Thursday. You had to work or help your family or do other things on the other days. They were well known for doing wonderful plays, musicals. They had some famous teachers who went on to perform in Atlanta. Here they are at a graduation in the 1950s with their cute pocketbooks and their precious white socks, all cleaned up. So in 1962, Brown versus Board of Education had been passed in 1954. It took them that long to integrate those kids into other schools across Savannah. The West Broad Street closes, West Broad Street School closes, and the Scarborough House sits empty for about 10 years. Many Savannahans were concerned and wanted to save it. So we're going to put a pin on that idea, and we're going to talk maritime history for 1 minute. So we have so many ship models in our museum that I can't tell you about them all and still stay within my time frame. So I'm going to give you some chronological listing. The slave ship Wanderer, it was a beautiful and fast yacht. Who has read Surviving Savannah, the book by Pat Callahan Henry? It's really good. For those of you who haven't, you should read it. That book is all about the steamship Pulaski, which after the Titanic sank, the Pulaski was called Titanic of the South because it was so sumptuously outfitted, had 2 of each job in order to go overnight, and it sunk off the coast of Wilmington, North Carolina. Gazaway Lamar, who someone tried to tell me was the Jeff Bezos of his era, Gazaway Lamar owned the Pulaski. His son was one of 3 of his family members to survive the wreck of the Pulaski, and the son Charlie Lamar is the one responsible for the slave ship Wanderer. It was the second to last transatlantic slave trading ship in America. Slave trading was outlawed in 1808, and it is crazy that 50 years later, this guy was like, oh, I'll get out of debt by picking up some Africans and bringing them across the ocean. Even now, Robert and I were talking about this, to think that you could take a ship across the ocean, land someplace, find some people, do something, and come back and arrive where you intended to be is just wild. But with celestial navigation, chart navigation, these people were very educated in a way that we aren't today, except with our cell phones, and they got it done. them back, and attempted to sell them into slavery. Luckily, he was intercepted, arrested. The crew was arrested when they arrived on Jekyll Island, and they were all tried. It was a hung jury because Charlie Lamar also was very wealthy and powerful Savannah. The African people were never recovered or sent back. It's a real tragedy, and there is a plaque on Jekyll Island describing that event. 1861, this is a painting in the museum. If we had a fire, this is what we would grab. So the frame, it is huge. It's about as big as your TV, so bigger than what you see there. But the frame is sumptuous. The image is of the Battle of Port Royal by an artist named Xanthus Smith. And 1861, it was a major battle in the Civil War. It helped, you probably know more of this history than I do, but it helped solidify control of South Carolina. Flash forward 2 years, 1863, Harriet Tubman rescued 800 African American people from this same location, got them onto ships, and they escaped to the north on the water. I never realized that the Underground Railroad was not just a walking route with the North Star as the guiding light. The Gibbs Museum in Charleston has an exhibition that opens on today, on the 29th, on this topic. So you definitely should go. There is a book, and I'm not going to remember the author's name because it's a long one, but it's called Combie, and it's the Combie River, and the Gibbs is telling the entire story of Harriet Tubman and the escape that she made via the water. 1862, we have an entire room on the Civil War and ironclad ships. It is a fascinating story. The people who worked these ships, the one in the middle is the SS Confederate naval ship Atlanta. And if you worked in there, you had a terrible working day. You were sweating. It was a coal-fired steamship engine. They were starting to develop the propeller propulsion versus the paddle wheel propulsion. And it was hot. It was so loud that if a cannonball hit the exterior of your ship, you basically were going deaf, incrementally during your service. But there are all kinds of wonderful things to see. I will, just because this shot is so nice, the cornice that you can see at the top, those are all original. When it was restored in the 80s by Historic Savannah Foundation, they took great pains to hire artisans to restore it exactly as it had been originally. The carpets were chosen by Mills Lane IV, and they're milled by an English company that was in business in 1819 and hypothetically sent that carpet to America that same year. So there's a lot of authenticity. We don't know exactly what the carpets might have looked like in the Scarborough house, but this is close. 1860 to 1862, the yacht America. We talked a little bit before about Bill Koch and the America's Cup. This yacht this is a replica of the first America that won a competition against British ships prior to this period in the 1850s. And the ship was so gorgeous, so fast, no one could beat her. They put out notices. Anyone wanting to compete against the ship America, show up on this date and we'll race you and see what happens. They beat everybody, and Queen Victoria is claimed to have watched from her ship, the Victoria and Albert, and she said, well, who came in second? And they said, nobody, because they all were so far back. No one had yet crossed the finish line. So the yacht America is then owned by some British people. It makes its way to Australia. It comes all the way back to America and is purchased by the Confederacy, renamed Camilla, and it was briefly a blockade runner up and down the Savannah River. It eventually was sunk in St. John's River in Jacksonville, where I think it still sits. So this we get into more generic shipping in Savannah. I love these images The barrels that you see, they're three biggest shipments out of Georgia in the 1900s are still the three biggest shipments out of Georgia. Any guesses?
Tobacco.
Cotton, pine, and pine byproduct. So the barrels are barrels of rosin. You would notch a pine tree in a certain way to get the sap to come down. You collect it at the bottom, and then you can turn it into turpentine and other things. This, I think, is just very sweet. It's a U.S. Navy Curtiss HS type flying boat landing near Southern States Fertilizer. If you can imagine the Truman Parkway that comes up the east side of Savannah, this is just east of that. And there's a guy named Reed Delaney who now owns that space. He still ships fertilizer around the globe. And this was one of his ancestors who owned the Southern States Fertilizer. When I first gave this lecture like 2 years ago, right when I started, my husband was looking over my shoulder and he said, well, I want to know what that ship is. And I said, well, I'm not going to go into that. And he said, I'm going to find out. So thanks to Jeff, we have the exact type of boat. It was very novel that this naval ship was landing in the middle of the Savannah River. We have Hunter Army Airfield, we have Fort Stewart, but it's really not that naval of a town. So the next few shots give you a little sense of when it has been featured. This is a classic tugboat in more naval moments. So here soldiers are returning from World War I. You can see, you have to look very closely. These are all people. There are people on every balcony. There are people on top of City Hall. So it was a huge deal that this ship was coming into port. People obviously had some notice to show up and cheer it on. I will also note that the Lane family, I could tell you like 10 other lectures as offshoots of this lecture because there's so much history here. But the Lane family has done a tremendous amount for historic preservation in Savannah. The top of the cupola of the City Hall once was brass or bronze. They insisted that they pay to gild it. So it is gold now because Mills Lane Jr. paid for it to be that way. All the Shepherd's Crook lights that you see running through down Bull Street and in Forsyth Park, the Lane family bought those. The trash cans that mimic French trash cans, the Lane family bought those. When they built the Civic Center, that's sort of an unattractive white modern box building in the middle of Savannah, the Lane family picked up all the tiny houses that were there and did infill on the east side of Savannah to try to preserve more of that historic look of the city. And really, they made it what it is today. This is the Swedish armored cruiser Fallschirm in front of City Hall. Again, you can see the dome of City Hall and the Manger building, one of the two buildings. I think it's supposed to become a Four Seasons shortly. Savannah was really gung-ho to support World War II and the building of Liberty ships. We built 88 Liberty ships at the Savannah shipyard. Women got involved, African-American people got involved, people got jobs who had never done that sort of work. We have some really sweet newsletters that come from the Savannah shipyard that detail who was there, what were they doing. People from rural Georgia who came and made more money than they had ever earned before, went on vacation for the first time ever at 60-something. They're very sweet. Here's women doing their part as welders. 20th century fishing boats. Again, I find it very hard to imagine Savannah with fishing boats, but I love seeing it. So the other piece that I just want to note is that Juliette Gordon Lowe, the founder of the Girl Scouts, is a Savannian. That's her in the middle of the left-hand side shot. I love it that she's holding the sweet little girl's hand. They had a program called Girl Scout Mariners. I was not a Girl Scout, but you can see one of them looking particularly thrilled with her steering ability in a boat. Julia Gordon Lowe said, never rock a boat for fun. A scout who so far forgets herself as to do such a foolhardy act should be forbidden to go in a boat again for some time as punishment. More drowning accidents are from some such fun. It is sin, not fun. So she was taking her maritime very seriously. Here's some other precious Girl Scout mariners doing some heaving on the left, probably pulling on the sail. Someone sewing a sail on the right. Now we get back to the house and the museum. So this is the original Ships of the Sea warehouse, looking from River Street. It went up 3 stories, so you would enter on River Street, go up 3 sets of stairs, see things on the way, and then exit on Bay Street. I think it looks like a bad combination of an old Pizza Hut and a Chinese restaurant. It's pretty funny, and I'm glad they moved it, because where we ended up is much classier. Here it is. These are Liberty Ship hatch-covered tables. I don't know if you've seen those. Those are all the rage in Savannah. We have an education space, and those are the tables in the education space. But this is generally what it looked like. Historic Savannah Foundation takes over in '72, does a renovation. This is the back of it. It had some, bad porches and roofs that the school had put on. It was in very, very bad shape. I do love the little school light, which was my school in Kansas. The plaster was all redone. The mantelpieces stayed. This is a rendition of what the house would have been like had it been 1819. So they tried to take it back to the original style. Historic Savannah Foundation had a little bit different finished look than what we have now. So this is the drawing that they did, and it did say conjectural restoration. So just know this is partly an interpretation. The front, I think, is pretty easy. The back is the question. This is what it looks like today. And you don't enter on the front, unfortunately. So again, I'm reinventing this place every single day. And if you come meet me, I'll take you on a tour and tell you all about it. Because we've done lots of really fun things. One of my goals is to open the front doors from MLK, because all the tourists come from City Market and they walk west, and then they have to find us. And it's not easy. You have to go down Martin Luther King, down the sidewalk next to a big wall, and there are signs, but they're not good signs. Then you have to walk in a garden gate, and it says, welcome, you made it, in a small blue sign. You get into the middle of this large garden, and you have no idea where you are. And hopefully you turn to the right, you see the Scarborough House, and you say, oh, that must be it. But it's not obvious. And so this is the back of the house as it was with Historic Savannah Foundation. They assumed that it had a double staircase. I don't know why. I think that's pretty popular to have a double staircase. And then there is the staff entrances, that center garden level going down. So that is another door that would have been the kitchens of the original house. Present day. 1966, this is what it looked like. Mills Lane IV moves his dad's museum from River Street down the block to the Scarborough Mansion, because it is so appropriate that a maritime museum lives in the Scarborough Mansion. I mean, it is William Scarborough's house. The SS Savannah is still so famous. It inspired so many ships to be named Savannah that I can't even tell you half of them. The most important right now is the nuclear ship Savannah, which is docked in Baltimore, and the federal government owns it, and they're trying to get Savannah to adopt it. It was created by Eisenhower during the Atoms for Peace process. He was trying to prove that nuclear energy did not have to just be destructive. It was not just a weapon, that it could be used for good. So they put it into a merchant passenger ship and sent it around the world for about 10 years. And it's lovely. It's very 1950s. It would create a nice element on the waterfront if we can make it happen. So I'll keep you posted. But the house is not easy to find. So one of my goals is to work with as many collaborators as possible. And the SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, has a little wing called SCAD Serves, and they help nonprofits. is going to come starting September 8th. I cannot wait. They're going to analyze all of our branding, redo it, and then redo the wayfinding. Wayfinding is how you move around the facility. So when you are coming from any direction, you should see signs that say, this is Ships of the Sea. Get in here, it's gonna be great. So I'm really excited. Now that you know the challenge, there's one of you here who had a terrible time trying to find us, and I'm sorry. And we will hopefully do it better. But now that you've been bored, you can pay extra attention as you're trying to get to us. We do have a parking lot. We have 75 parking spaces. I did turn that into an earned income revenue stream. So where once you could get free parking generally, now you have to pay for it. So, and I make, during March, St. Patrick's Day, we make $10,000 on parking. The rest of the year it's about 6, but it's worth it. So this is really a great image because you can see that the bushes are short, the large holly bushes on either side of the single staircase that Mills Lane decided was more appropriate. They're all very small. It is not like that now. And this is the, sorry, I skipped a few. This is the atrium. There is a ship in there now, which I'll show you in a second. But the atrium has been painted to look like the Scarboroughs would have had it. They've done paint analysis. It is marble veneer painting. The columns are faux veneer painting. The doors are all mahogany. Again, faux mahogany, probably pine. There's a 2-story atrium that goes up in the center, and there is a skylight, which you can see a little hint of at the top. Beautiful fan light is original William J. All of it is original William J. Even this railing, the banister, might have been recreated, but that's exactly what it looked like. The school stuck a giant staircase from the front door up to the 2nd floor landing towards where we are, and then another one from the other side to the 3rd floor that was there before. This is a gorgeous shot that just gives you a sample of what you find. There's something that leads you through the museum into one room to the next, and from one maritime story to another. This is looking down over that ship in the atrium. This is the USS Savannah, which was involved in the Civil War. Again, fighting, on the side of the Confederacy, trying to get capture Northern troops, Northern materials, and vice versa. This one's especially sweet because you have all the sailors leaning over the spars of the ship, doing their duty, letting the ropes down so that they can unfurl and clew out the sail. This is the ballroom. You see the Anne on the left-hand side. The center ship is the Long Dock, which is a Revolutionary warship. It has 88 guns and is arguably the largest ship, definitely in that room, maybe of all the sailing ships that we have. The Wanderer you can see straight through on the left-hand side there, through the crack there, that case. Again, the carpet is something that would have existed in 1819, milled by this place in England. It features all kinds of Egyptian symbolism. Robert Livingston had just discovered Pharaoh's tomb, and Egyptomania was a big thing, both in America and in Europe. Here you get a better shot of it. You can see a sphinx inside the maze. There is an entrance and an exit that is sometimes fun to do. The lights are something that Historic Savannah Foundation chose, not necessarily period appropriate, but not authentic. They're not original, but authentic to the period. This is a shot of the 2nd floor, a figurehead that we have on view, some scout students gazing at it, calipers, all kinds of instruments that would have been used to build ships, find your way using the stars. This is an advertisement for a ship, for ship's wares, things that you would have needed on a ship. And if you didn't know how to read, you could look at this little man and say, oh, that's where I go for my ship's tools. We have a fabulous case of scrimshaw. If you need another lecture, I can kind of give it on scrimshaw. I did a deep dive with some people from Mystic, Connecticut and Mystic Seaport on scrimshaw. And generally they loved most of it. There are some pieces that they say, oh, some artist got a tooth and made that 100 years ago. It wasn't an authentic whaler's work. That's the most authentic. You can see in the center a dolphin jaw. The short teeth on the top row are sperm whale teeth. The bottom row is baleen whale teeth, but only the black ones. The white ones are sperm whale bone carved like a corset stay that you would have done, maybe you carved it for your loved one and she tucked it in her corset. There's an ostrich egg and some carved swordfish nose on the far right-hand side in the middle. All kinds of things to discover. In 2012, Ships of the Sea decided that they would take on a big project, buy the property to the north of the museum, and turn it into an assembly room to be rented out for events. You can see on the right-hand side here is Scarborough House. Next to it is this auto body shop. They originally fixed carriages and then cars after that. It was dilapidated and run down. SCAT bought it, and they wanted to build a building for one of their departments. And there's a huge sycamore tree that you can see on the very right-hand side that they believe was 200 years old and was there during Scarborough's time. City of Savannah said, you may not build what you want to build that close to that sycamore because we need it to be preserved. And so they said, fine, we're selling it, and Ships of the Sea jumped at the opportunity and said, we'll buy it. So this is the Scarborough Garden in like the 80s or so. Well, yeah, no, it'd be 90s because the back looks like that. This is looking immediately left. You walk through the big bushes. That's the assembly room on the left-hand side, where we host one wedding every single week for 3 months in the spring and 3 months in the fall. This is the vertical view. So again, to orient you, Scarborough House is here. The sycamore is here. The covered assembly room, our parking lot wraps all the way around. And then we have a gorgeous maple grove. Those are trident maples. And we have the fanciest astroturf in town. We had the hardest time trying to grow grass under these maple trees that we said, fine, we'll just get the fancy astroturf. And it's soft, it's beautiful. These are reflecting ponds. We have an installation, a maritime installation on the wall. We did our very first fundraising event in March, and this woman made a gorgeous macrame woven piece called the Seven Sisters. It uses the Juliet knot, which is called a love knot, and she made these 7 long strands for the Seven Sisters, who were the daughters of, who holds the globe over his head? Atlas, thank you. Atlas and Pleiade, and so the Seven Sisters is also known as the Pleiades constellation, and they were turned from humans into doves, and then so that Icarus wouldn't shoot them, they were turned into stars. And so it's a beautiful piece with a wonderful history. So you get a sense of the landscape. One tip, well not a tip, just a little sad note, the sycamore tree died. We had to cut it back in January of last year, and then it started growing again. So now it's this 12-foot stump because we couldn't cut it down any further. There wasn't equipment that large, and we couldn't get a crane in because we have so much, gorgeous garden around it, too many walls. And so now it's coming back, and so we're giving it a second life, which I think is really nice. This is the view from MLK of the North Garden, and you can see that's the carriage gate on the left. This is the view. We host Family Day there, we host lectures there. We're trying to engage every citizen, visitor, or Savannian that we can. There's a view of the Talmadge Bridge and a little belvedere that you can walk up and look over the site. Again, the reflecting pools. So my goal is to bring Ships of the Sea into the present day. We tell 300 years of maritime history. We do the best work on the older stuff, which is great. And that's stuff we don't all know about. But I also don't want to miss the fact that the Georgia Ports Authority and the other terminals on the river are making history every single day. There are 4 types of container ships, or I should say 4 types of ships that come into Savannah. Container ships like this, roll-on, roll-off, which are car carrying ships. Break bulk cargo ships, which are push
that's holding natural gas or another liquid substance. So I have a break bulk cargo ship. I don't have a container ship or a roll on roll off, but we do have some tankers, but they're not exactly modern day. So my goal is to get all of those into the museum to tell the story of this amazing port city that has been at the forefront of shipping for almost 300 years, because we're nearly there. So we're working really hard. I do want to invite all of you to come visit, because really, when you come in and see it and understand that you've seen it in 2D, and then you can see it in 3D and experience it, I think you'll really enjoy it. One last piece, when I started, so I started in March of 2023. I got a haircut in June of 2023. I get a regular haircut. My hair's almost always like this. And my hair cutter, who goes by the Hair Witch, she said to me, "Oh, did I tell you about my latest tattoo?" I said, "No, Corey, what did you get?" She had on her forearm of her right arm, she had a little drawing that looks like a Victorian vase with flowers draping out of it. And I said, "Well, where did you get that?" She said, "Oh, I looked at a piece of scrimshaw. It was a whalebone, and it was a baleen whalebone, and it had 3 images on it, and what was this thing?" And I just loved it. And I thought, that is so weird. Who else in Savannah has a maritime tattoo? And so then I started stalking people, and I was at Husk, the restaurant, with my sister and my brother and the kids, and the guy who was serving us had these waves coming out of his short sleeve shirt, and I said, "Oh, is that a maritime tattoo?" And he said, "Yes, and this is him." And this is Ian Phillips. He still works at Husk. And he's young, he's so sweet. He brought his fiance, he got married recently, and he feels so famous because his image is on the wall in a maritime museum. And so this is a sailing ship that's on the back of his arm. I especially love the stars. Someone last week told me that if you got a tattoo and the ink dripped someplace where it shouldn't, they would just fill it in and make a little star out of it. I had not heard that before. But he had just gotten out of the Navy, and he had this sailing ship on the back of his arm, and he had an image of himself on his ankle with his rucksack on his back and his naval discharge papers, and he was running to get out of the Navy. So we kept looking for people all over the place. I would find people at Whole Foods. I found people at Publix. I found people everywhere. And then we put up bulletin boards, and we said, "If you have a maritime tattoo and you want to be in our exhibition, come on this day and you can be photographed." Every person that was photographed got an electronic copy of their tattoo, and 28 of them were featured on the wall, and then the tattoo artists are on the 2nd floor. It is a really fun exhibition, whether you have a tattoo, whether you like tattoos. It just is really interesting, and there are very specific things that maritime people get. For instance, for every 5,000 nautical miles that you have sailed, you get a swallow somewhere. Sometimes on your shoulder, sometimes on your arm. There's one guy featured who has a kraken, a Norse mythological octopus, all over his shoulder, and he has about 10 swallows on his other arm. So it has been really fun. Robert showed up for one of the after hours related to the tattoo show, so you can tell them what you saw. And it has been really fun. An anthropological analysis has turned into an embrace of Savannah's community. People show up all the time. My yoga teacher is in there. The guy who is our consultant for our customer relationship management database, he's in there. He works at the public library. The guy who teaches maritime archaeology at Georgia Southern, he's in it. His student is in it. A guy from the Army Corps who used to work for the Ogeechee Riverkeeper, who I consulted with, he's there. So it's really fun, and that will close August 31st. The show after that is a work by a guy named Rob Strati, S-T-R-A-T-I. His wife broke her mother's blue willow plate, and Rob said, "Well, let's not throw it away, I might do something with that." He took a ballpoint pen and he glued the plate generally in order but spread out, and he filled in the drawing with imagined parts of the blue willow design. So he does this with all different kinds of plates. Those will be on view September 25th through April. Then we have a illustration show May 22nd of next year for a year that will focus on sequential art cartoons of the 4 major ships, the Pulaski, the Savannah, the Anne, and the Wanderer. So we're continuing to try to do fun things to bring people in and make maritime history relevant and part of your life. So, any questions? Yes? We know each other, thank goodness. Yes. And we need more of you. It's fun. We're trying to reach everybody. You know, Propeller Club is great because you get a really wide swath of people involved in the maritime industry. But everybody can be involved, yeah.
I've been interested in maritime history for a good part of my life. So I've been to Greenwich, England. I've been to Mystic. I've been to the National Maritime Museum. I've seen ships, models that were 300 years old, the best that the Brits could make back then. And I was impressed when I went into the Ships at the Sea Museum because who funded those museums? Not Glenn Models Blaine.
Yeah, those be like.
They are extremely expensive models, beautifully cased and wonderfully done. So if you're, if anything, interested in craftsmanship and modeling and stuff like that, the museum is well worth visiting. Besides the fact that each one of those models are specific to the history and evolution of maritime events in Savannah.
Absolutely. I also think that part of why maritime history is interesting is because it's the story of people, you know, bar pilots, people who are on the water doing a job and telling their tale. I mean, that is really the cool part. So I do want to start a oral history project. We collect different new things. We don't have a ton of new things because we do not have a lot of storage space, but you know, if you find someone with an interesting artifact that might relate, let us know. Encourage them to come by. Any other questions? Yes. So he asked if there are artifacts that have been taken out of the rivers. If people find an artifact in the river, they're supposed to call the Department of Natural Resources, and they are supposed to manage conserving them, which is expensive because you have to desalinate the object, which means putting it in vats of water for a very, very long time and, you know, reducing the amount of salt over time. I don't know what they found. There are so many waterways in Savannah and surrounding regions. Kurt Norrell, who is this maritime archaeologist at Georgia Southern that I mentioned, he said to me, let's do something about stuff I found in the surrounding area. Well, it is almost too much, and we don't have a huge changing exhibition space. It's really wall space. It's 3D doesn't work great because there's too much stuff in there. But I feel like a lecture series might be something that could touch on that. The most interesting thing that has been found lately was because of the dredging of the Savannah River that ended in 2022, and they found, I want to say it's like 12 cannons. They thought they were Revolutionary War era and invited the head of the British Navy to come down. He said, that's great, these are lovely, but they're not mine. And they found a mark on them, and I think it's an H and a P, and that was someone during closer to the Civil War era. The Coastal Heritage Society runs 6 sites in Savannah: Fort Jackson, the Visitor Center, the Railroad Museum, Pinpoint, the oyster shelling place on the very southern part of Savannah. Others that I can't think of right now, but they are going to be the recipient of those, and they're hosting a huge exhibition starting next year in 2026, featuring these cannons, reinterpreting them and showing them off. They're excited. Yeah. Anything else? How many ships in the museum? I haven't counted lately. We have everything from the Titanic, which none of us want to talk about because it's so cliche, but every child that comes through our doors is like, oh my God, it's the Titanic. They're probably 50 in different rooms, maybe a few less than that, but we have a number of them not on view that have been carved by a guy whose name is not coming to my head right now, who worked at the Georgia Ports Authority for a long time, and they're smaller. The ones on view are very nice. They're very meticulously made. They illustrate best that ship and what it would have looked like. Oh, Annapolis, Maryland? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's one ship from 1806. It's a British naval ship, and it's an authentic model from 1806. That's the only one we have. Everything else was made 1980s to 2010ish by the same guy, this man William Hitchcock, who himself has a really interesting story. His family ran a prosthetic limb manufacturing company, so I feel like he was predisposed to very fine motor skill activity in his life. But each maritime museum is different, and ours is too. There are some ships in our museum that are called Savannah that have never visited Savannah. Those bother me. There's one on the second floor that has no history. It's just a super gorgeous luxury yacht made of teak. That one I'm going to put my cargo ship there and try and tell more of this present day story instead of that. Any other questions? All right, thank you all. I appreciate it.
The museum itself is wonderful. There's a group of us, 6 of us went not long ago. We spent a couple of hours there, which was longer than we anticipated, but it was so interesting. We just kept walking and walking and walking. And as Molly said, it's the maritime history. It's also the house. The house itself is just gorgeous. And the gardens are absolutely gorgeous as well, and extremely large. They were setting up for a wedding that day, and it was just beyond beautiful. So go ahead, go down to Savannah, have some fun, go across to City Market, go across to Corleone's, have some Italian food, and enjoy your day. And thank you all so much